Welcome to the April 2026 edition of Business and Policy News, brought to you by the Farm Advisory Service. This newsletter helps you to scan your horizons, prepare for industry changes, and keeps you abreast of the latest research and policy updates. Along with our regular monthly updates on policy, arable, beef, sheep and milk, in this edition we will also be looking at Makerspace, a digital dairy chain project looking at adding value to dairy produce. Hello, my name is Christine Beaton and I am the editor of this publication. First up, we have this month's news. Just when we thought things were finally getting back on a more even keel in terms of inflation and the bank base rate, the war in Iran and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz for any ships seen to be supporting America and Israel, we are now facing escalating fuel and energy prices, rising inflation, and rumours of a hike rather than a reduction in the Bank of England base rate. With new strikes and missile interceptions being reported in Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Iran and Lebanon, there does not look to be any resolution to the war or the closure of the Strait of Hormuz anytime soon. Indeed, the NATO and European allies, reluctant to get involved in a war instigated by America and Israel, could become a potentially history-defining moment in terms of world alliances. Political waters are being further muddied by America deciding to lift sanctions on Russia's petrol sales, especially as profits from which could be used to fund further attacks on Ukraine. Since the start of the war in Iran, Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil prices, has risen by 60%, from $73 per barrel up to $119 per barrel. With the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, concerns about the availability of oil have already pushed up UK petrol prices by 14% and diesel by 27%, and has caused fuel rationing in Sri Lanka, Slovenia, and Australia has responded to the increasing fuel crisis by having fuel excise duty for 3 months and offering free public transport in several states to encourage people not to drive. With America saying that it is considering ending the US military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed, to meet our fuel requirements, then we are faced with either paying Iran for the safe passage of each ship through the straits, buying oil from America, or even Russia. It therefore comes as no surprise that companies in the UK have been reporting upwards of a 50% increase in sales of photovoltaic panels and a 30% increase in heat pumps. In the financial markets, the war in Iran has seen the FTSE 100 fall from a high of over 10,900 points at the end of February to a low of 9,814 on the 23rd of March, before climbing to around 10,200 points at the end of March. While the current reported inflation rate remains at 3%, the expectation is that this will rise once the current fuel and fertiliser prices filter through. While bizarrely, due to changes in consumer spending, the inflation rate calculation now takes into account changes in the cost of dog grooming, while more relevance to the agricultural industry is the inclusion of alcohol-free beer. The extent to which inflation rises over the coming month could have a significant bearing on the outcome of the next Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee meeting on the 30th of April. Financial experts are divided as to whether the base rate will be held at 3.75% or whether it will be increased by 0.25% to 4%. The prediction earlier this year of 3 cuts across the year, bringing the base rate down to 3%, is rapidly fading as the conflict in the Middle East continues. Before we move on to what is in this month's edition of Business and Policy News, on a lighter note, after 38 very enjoyable years working for SEC, or the college, I have decided it's time to put myself out to pasture, so this is my last edition. My role of editor will be very ably filled by Kira Sanakan, a consultant in our Lanark office, who writes our daily articles, and Alistair Beattie, a senior consultant in our Dumfries office. And my policy article will now be in the very capable hands of Heather Stewart, a consultant in our Tariff office, who is no stranger to business and policy news, as she is also the producer of this podcast. In this month's edition of Business and Policy News, in addition to our regular updates on arable, sheep, dairy and beef, our specialist article, Mark Robinson, SRUC's Dairy Research and Innovation Centre in Dumfries, asks, are you making the most of the resources you have available, or making the best margin you can on your farm or croft produce. And finally, given the very significant increase in energy and fertiliser costs due to the war in Iran, farmers and crofters are once again facing difficult decisions with regards to trying to mitigate rising costs without compromising output. In our recommended further articles this month includes an episode of FAS TV where the Nielsen family from East Kilbride demonstrate the benefits of having photovoltaic panels, not just to lessen their electricity bills, but to power their vehicles used for the retail business. Let's take a look at this month's policy briefs, starting with the Food and Drink Processing Scheme. As part of a £9 million investment by the Scottish Government to drive efficiency, productivity, innovation and investment in the Scottish food and drink sector, applications have opened for the Food and Drink Processing Scheme. The Food and Drink Processing Scheme offers grants of up to £400,000 to cover up to 40% of a project's eligible costs. In terms of eligible costs, under buildings and fixed infrastructure, this includes construction, extension or refurbishment of buildings to enable food and drink processing to take place. This includes new or extended buildings. Grants will not be awarded for storage or conditioning facilities that are integral to such processing. Under machinery and equipment, this includes transforming, preparing, fermenting, refining, preserving, stabilising, maturing, conditioning, packing or otherwise finishing the product as part of a processing operation. The deadline for applications is 12 p.m. on Friday the 15th of May 2026. Successful grant applications will be notified during July, with all grants awarded needing to be spent by the 31st of March 2027. Please note that grants will not be awarded for primary production costs, including equipment and buildings or infrastructure used for growing, rearing, harvesting or extracting raw materials, for example, cultivation equipment or livestock sheds and or milking equipment. Grants will not be awarded for building works or equipment used mainly for retail or direct sales to the public, for example, farm shops and cafes, nor for processing into a non-food or drink product. The same applies for transport and distribution costs, such as delivery vehicles, routine maintenance, repairs or replacement of existing items that don't add new processing capacity or seek to boost overall efficiency or productivity. And finally, grants will not be awarded for operational costs, consumables and or marketing. To find out if your business and project are eligible, please use the link provided in the show notes. Moving on to the review of Community Right to Buy. Following earlier public consultation, new proposals to combine existing right to buy legislation to simplify the process for community groups to take over land and assets have been published. Taking into consideration the existing powers introduced since 2003, the review examined the community right to buy, the crofting community right to buy, the community right to buy abandoned, neglected or detrimental land, and the right to buy land for further sustainable development. Analysis of the consultation responses showed widespread support for consolidating the non-crofting compulsory purchase rights and the non-legislative changes such as updating guidance and setting up a public register for existing community groups. However, following the consultation, due to the unique nature of crofting in Scotland, the crofting community right to buy will not be merged. Instead, it will be updated to simplify the process. In terms of timing, it is expected that the revisions and mergers will be made during the course of the next Parliament. Turning to funding for Gleylag geese on Uist, the Scottish Government has announced an additional £20,000 of funding for the culling of Gleylag geese in Uist, bringing the total annual budget for control measures on the islands to £30,000. Thousands of Gleylag geese feed on Uist's macar. These species-rich coastal grasslands are internationally recognised for their biodiversity and cultural importance. Numbers of geese have increased significantly in recent years, causing damage to crops as well as impacting on ground nesting birds, including corncrakes. Help for households using heating oil. In response to conflict in the Middle East, the resultant significant increase in fuel costs, the Scottish Government have launched an emergency fund to help support lower-income households dependent on oil to heat their home. It is estimated that around 6%, equating to 142,000 of Scottish households, use oil to heat their homes. The £5.4 million of Scottish funding being offered is in addition to the £4.6 million pledged by the UK Government. Further details of eligibility for the scheme will be announced in the coming weeks, with the scheme being delivered through Advice Direct Scotland. For more information, please see the link in the show notes. Moving on to electronic identification for cattle. The Scottish Government have announced a delay in the implementation of electronic identification, EID, for cattle, linked to the ongoing sanitary and phytosanitary talks between the UK Government and the EU. While compulsory EID for cattle is now not expected to be implemented in Scotland until January 2028, the exact form of the identification is not yet known, as whilst currently the Scottish Government favours ultra-high frequency ear tags, this is a divergence from the current EU requirement, which uses low-frequency ear tags and 2 matching identifiers. DEFRA have already committed to a low-frequency system with an anticipated mandatory switch to low-frequency tags for newborn calves from 2027. Scottish Agricultural Wages Order 2026. From the 1st of April 2026, the new Scottish Agricultural Wages Order comes into force. Changes of note are the minimum hourly rate increases to £12.71, the apprentice rate to £8, the additional sum increases to £1.91, and the dog allowance rises to £11.81. From the 6th of April, statutory sick pay, SSP, becomes a right from day one. However, agricultural sick pay, ASP, continues only to apply after 52 weeks of employment and only from day 4 of illness. This means workers will receive statutory sick pay from the very first day they are off sick, with agricultural sick pay kicking in later for those who meet the eligibility criteria, meaning that employers will need to manage both schemes at once. Turning to the new Rural Support Plan. The Scottish Government have published the Rural Support Plan 2026 through to 2031 as part of the plan support for Scotland's active farmers and crofters. Replacing the legacy EU Common Agricultural Policy support, the focus of the new 4-tier framework is on sustainable food production, action for climate and nature, and supporting rural communities over the next 5 years. With regards to the 4 new tiers, Tier 1 will initially be based on the current Basic Farm Payment, BPS. This base-level direct payment is aimed at supporting farmers and crofters engaged in food production and land management. It will be conditional on essential standards being met to ensure appropriate activity, climate, biodiversity, and business efficiency outcomes, and will include eligibility criteria such as being deemed an active farmer or crofter, having a whole farm plan, cross-compliance, greening, and Fair Work First. Tier 2 will build on the base level direct payment. The enhanced level direct payment will support farmers and crofters whose agricultural practices do even more for climate change and nature. It will offer additional measures to deliver outcomes relating to efficiencies, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and nature restoration and enhancement. Tier 3 will involve an elective payment to support action that creates and/or protects habitats or species or improves business sustainability. It will focus on wide-ranging but targeted measures for nature restoration, innovation, and supply chain support. This could be specific to a particular species or habitat, the creation of new agroforestry systems or woodlands, supporting conversion to alternative forms of agriculture, such as organic production, encourage innovation, and provide supply chain support. Aspects of Tier 3 will initially be delivered through familiar mechanisms such as EECS, with improvements to the scheme being made going forward. And finally, Tier 4 will be complementary to Tiers 1, 2 and 3 and will focus on aspects such as continuous professional development, advisory services, support for tree planting, woodland management, peatland restoration, and management in order to grow skills and capabilities within Scottish agriculture and within rural and island communities. The new framework will allow new support measures to be launched using the powers under the Agricultural and Rural Communities Scotland Act 2024. The Scottish Government have announced the following illustrative budget split between the 4 tiers for 2025-26 and 2027-28. Tier 1, £282 million. Tier 2, £142 million. Tier 3, £25.6 million. And Tier 4, £6.5 million. While Tiers 1 and 2 will not be competitive, Tiers 3 and 4 will have elements of competition for funding. Approximately a further £23.5 million of funding will be made available to cover animal diseases and around £10 million of funding for smaller scale, one-off and generalist rural support, including funding for RSABI, Farmstrong, Tenant Farmers, Agricultural Holdings, SASA Agricultural Wages and the Food and Drink Industry Strategy. For further details of the Rural Support Plan, please see the show notes. For more information on any of the policies, updates and articles in this edition, please see the show notes where you will find numerous links to relevant websites, publications and further sources of information. To conclude this month's policy briefs, we have 4 key dates to note. Land used to claim a basic payment scheme payment in the current scheme year must be at your disposal on the 15th of May 2026. The basic payment scheme entitlements transfer window opens on the 15th of May 2026. Scrupid must receive single application form basic payment scheme applications by their deadline of midnight on the 15th of May 2026. And finally, the deadline for Scrupid to receive an application to transfer basic payment scheme entitlements with an effective date of the 15th of May this year is the 2nd of April 2026. We have also included links in the show notes for 3 Scottish Government consultations and 4 publications that may be of interest. Moving on to Arable, starting with an overview of the market and the weather. Global grain markets have continued to rise and fall in line with developments in the Iran war and the consequential fluctuations in oil, gas and fertiliser prices. That aside, with global grain and oilseed supplies currently fairly secure, any sign of a lull or dip in Iranian hostilities is tending to see prices come back down. There is, however, a growing question mark over how farmers will react if the recent sharp rises in fuel and fertiliser prices are sustained. If farmers' margins keep getting squeezed by rising fuel and fertiliser prices, and this is not reflected in the market prices for grains and oilseeds, output could start to be impacted as early as the coming harvest. A useful indicator of US farmers' intentions is the United States Department of Agriculture Prospective Planting Survey released on the 31st of March 2026, which could indicate any shifts in crop areas this spring in the United States, for example, less fertiliser-intensive maize or more lower-input soybeans. Though the timing of the survey means that it may not fully have captured the impact of the more recent price swings in fuel and fertiliser. Turning to the weather, spring weather in the UK and Europe has generally been dry and favourable, giving a good start to spring sowings. The condition of winter crops in the UK is also reported to be good, with the AHDB estimating that by 23rd of March, 82% of UK winter wheat crops were in good or excellent condition. This is the best crop condition score at this point since 2023, with heavy winter waterlogging receding and soil conditions improving. Elsewhere, the main weather concerns are seen in South America, which is affecting the soya harvest. In the US, drought has been affecting winter wheat in the southern plains, though rain is forecast. In the UK, domestic wheat prices have fallen by around £5 per tonne in the last month. The Ensus bioethanol plant has recently announced that it will reopen imminently for an initial 3-month period, potentially requiring up to 100,000 tonnes of grain per month. Vivergo, the plant's owners, have reopened it following the granting of £100 million of UK government support to ensure a domestic supply of carbon dioxide, a vital ingredient for UK food processing and other industries. The doubling of natural gas prices has apparently cut European fertiliser production and related carbon dioxide output. The Ensis plant is particularly vital for Scotland as it offers a large market just over the border when Scotland has a surplus of grain, as it does now, and also draws in English wheat, stopping it heading north. In the last month, UK feed wheat futures are up £5.40 per tonne to £167.65 per tonne for May 2026. New crop wheat futures are up £9.50 per tonne to £186.50 for November 26 and up £10.70 per tonne to £197.10 per tonne for July 2026. Oilseed rape prices in the last month have risen by £10 per tonne to around £415 per tonne delivered in Scotland. The main driver has been volatile but mostly high oil prices lending support via the use of vegetable oils in the biodiesel market. Moving on to input costs. The war in Iran has increased the costs of key inputs for crop production, namely fuels and fertilisers. How much have these costs increased? How do these affect growing costs per hectare and per tonne? And have grain markets risen enough to cover these costs? First of all, looking at fertiliser. In the last month, the UK ammonium nitrate price has risen by £102 per tonne to £504 per tonne, a rise of 25%, and granular urea has risen by £163 per tonne to £618 per tonne, a rise of 36%. However, the price of potash and phosphate have risen by much less, between 5 to 7% to date. Despite recent rapid gains, the prices of all fertilisers remain well below the highs seen in autumn 2022, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when ammonium nitrate reached the eye-watering level of £900 per tonne. In looking at what's happening with fuels, in the last month, UK Brent crude oil prices rose by 58% to £84 per barrel, and UK natural gas prices have risen by 76% to £1.36 per therm. On-farm red diesel prices have risen by around 63 pence per litre to over 135 pence per litre, and kerosene heating oil has risen a similar amount to around £1.25 per litre, although price quotes vary wildly. Oil and gas prices are now higher than after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Oil prices affect the price of almost everything, including transport and the price of plastics, with gas prices having a strong impact on fertiliser prices. Turning to grain growing costs. The impact of rising fuel and fertiliser costs will vary by farm depending on how much they have bought ahead. Since the war in Iran started on the 28th of February up to the 27th of March, it is estimated that rising input costs could have added around £15 to £16 per tonne for cereals, £22 for beans, and £32 per tonne for oilseed rape. These figures are from an AHDB comparison on the changes in estimated fuel and nitrogen fertiliser costs for growing and drying crops in Scotland for the 2026 harvest, and are based on the assumption that inputs were bought now, though in reality much has been secured for the current growing season. While the grain and oilseeds markets have also risen, so far this has only covered around half the cost increase for both cereals and oilseed rape. For UK winter crops, the potential erosion of margins in the current crop is not likely to greatly influence the harvest outcome, though farmers may seek lower fertiliser rates and cut fuel use where they can. However, for spring crops, this could be enough to lower plantings, particularly of cereals such as spring barley in the UK and maize in the EU and US. There is a potential for a rise in the fallow area or lower input crops such as beans in the UK and soybeans in the US. Whenever we see such large swings in input costs, it pays to recalculate budgets so that the true costs and updated sales figures trigger known budget prices and margins. It is always better to be horrified than mystified, so that the opportunities can be taken and the risks offset in time where possible. Our show notes give us a table of the anticipated increases in input costs for growing cereals and oilseeds crops for the harvest in 2026. And finally, for the arable section, crop prices for May 2026 are as follows. Wheat, £173 per tonne. Feed barley, £149 per tonne. Beans, £210 per tonne. Milling oats, £120 to £165 per tonne. And oilseed rape, £416 per tonne.
Let's take a look at the latest from the beef sector. Finished prices continue to ease. Currently, sticky best describes where we are at with finished prices. By the week ending the 21st of March 2026, Scottish prices were at 642 pence per kilo deadweight for R4L grade steers, back 1.4 pence per kilo on the week and 3.4% behind the same week in 2025. GB deadweight prime steer prices also recorded a decline for the week ending the 21st of March, with average steer prices sitting at 633.6 pence per kilo, down 1.9p from the previous week, and 43.2p per kilo lower than the same period last year. However, this is still 140 pence per kilo above the 5-year average. Scottish prime cattle prices remained relatively flat through March. The 642 pence per kilo deadweight price for the week ending the 21st of March for R4L grading steers is a huge contrast from this time last year when prices were surging towards £7 per kilo deadweight. At the time of writing, at the end of March, prices being quoted are around 635 to 640 pence per kilo deadweight, with reports suggesting that some processors may look to add 2 to 3 pence per kilo to secure supplies as output across the UK and Ireland continue to underpin prices. However, despite this constrained supply, retail sales continue to disappoint. Demand is simply not there, with consumers switching to cheaper cuts such as mince and or opting to buy chicken or pork instead of beef. The weather is not helping consumer demand either, as it is neither cold enough for roasting joints nor hot enough for barbecues. Turning to store cattle markets. Store cattle trade continues to be strong, with producers averaging well above £4 per kilo live weight. Some producers are receiving around 120 to 150 pounds per head more than this time last year, with top prices of 5 to 6 pounds per kilo being paid for top quality, lighter and younger grazing types. Markets continue to report strong buyer demand. However, in recent weeks, there has been a greater demand for lighter, leaner, younger stock to go out to grass, with demand for heavier cattle slipping back. The stagnant finish price will have undoubtedly contributed to the reduction of heavier stores coming through. Demand will likely remain strong for the foreseeable future as finishers look to secure numbers for going to grass. However, it is still early for turnout, with nights remaining cold and the ground remaining wet in some parts of the country. Although grass is starting to grow, cold weather and wet soil conditions have led to a reduction in grass growth, which is not helping those sitting with reduced silage stocks. A wet and cold winter on the back of last year's dry summer has meant that forage supplies are now becoming increasingly tight. Reduced yields and the need to feed additional forage to sheep this year has led to strong demand for silage and straw. Tight fodder supplies and rising feed costs are putting further pressure on livestock producers. Looking at the effects of the war in the Middle East. The impact of the war in Iran has led to the return of fertilizer price volatility. Farmers and crofters are facing increased costs, with some having seen the cost of fertilizer effectively double overnight. As the war in Iran continues, there are also concerns from suppliers regarding the price and availability of silage wrap, which is made from petrochemicals. Fuel prices have also increased significantly, which not just affects farmers and crofters directly, but inevitably affects the wider supply chain, including livestock hauliers, general haulage costs, and other supply chain links. All this has come at a time when costs for many businesses, including variable and fixed costs, as well as finance and borrowings, have also continued to rise. Although cattle prices in recent years are as high as they've ever been, margins remain pressured. The situation in the Middle East, if not resolved quickly, is expected to add significant pressure due to rising fuel and fertilizer costs. From a beef consumption perspective, as consumers are increasingly met with hikes at fuel pumps and rising energy costs, this will also impact their food spending habits. Consumers are looking for the best value in terms of meat protein and are often opting to buy cheaper manufactured beef. This is unlikely to change in the short term. Turning our attention to cull cows, we ask, have prices reached their peak? Cow prices have continued to strengthen, sitting at 565 to 575 pence per kilo deadweight, up 5 pence per kilo from 2025 levels for the same week, with reports suggesting that there are better deals for well-fleshed R-grade cows. As consumers increasingly switch to cheaper cuts of meat, this is providing additional support for the cull cow market. Several markets have commented that the cull cow trade is as expensive now as it has ever been, with strong demand for cows both dead and in the live ring.
If you're enjoying listening to business and policy news, why not try one of the other Farm Advisory Service podcasts? In the latest episode of Rural Roundup, George and Mary Jane get a policy update from Professor Stephen Thompson. Tune in to hear about EFA management, the single application form, policy changes for 2026, Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme, Future Farm Investment Scheme, Rural Support Plan, and other capital grants.
Moving on to sheep, prices soar into spring. The lift in old season lamb price in March continued its upward trajectory from February, exceeding £8 per kilo by the end of the month. This was an increase of almost 99 pence per kilo compared to this time last year. This sharp rise has predominantly been driven by a tighter GB supply from a reduced 2025 lamb crop and demand retaining strong throughout the season, with EHDB retail data showing a rise of 6.2% in lamb spend and a volume increase of 1.5%, despite a 4.6% rise in average cost to the consumer. Export volumes have also continued to increase, showing demand to be both strong domestically and from the EU. Domestic demand has also been supported by Ramadan, running over February and March, finishing with Eid al-Fitr on the 19th and 20th of March, closely followed by an early Easter this year on the 5th of April. March also saw an increase again on the price of cull ewes, with the Scottish cull ewe price rising to £131.62 per head for the week commencing the 21st of March 2026. Turning to deadweight price changes. The changes to deadweight reporting came into effect in March, meaning that it is now compulsory that all abattoirs in Great Britain report deadweight sheep prices and classify carcasses to a set standard, with all lambs reported requiring to be less than 12 months old, which means no permanent incisor teeth erupted. From the 1st of January each year, lambs born between January and September the previous year will be reported as old season lambs. All price information is now for prime sheep between 12 and 21.5 kilos SQQ weight and dressed to a UK standard with kidney knobs, channel fat and diaphragm skirt removed. For this reason, we have seen a sharp rise in reported numbers culled. However, this also reflects the greater number of slaughterhouses now reporting data. Looking ahead for the domestic market, the Muslim population remains a key market to look after in the UK sheep industry, with lamb and mutton a stable part of their diet, particularly around key festivals. This was reiterated last month at the QMS conference, which focused on the future thinking on red meat. EHDB studies in 2024 found that Muslims account for 6.5% of the UK population, yet consume 30% of all sheep meat produced in the UK, showing them to be a significant population in terms of UK sheep meat consumption. AHDB predict that 80% of halal customers eat lamb on a weekly basis, and 64% also eat mutton on a weekly basis, compared to only 6% of the general UK population. As this is undoubtedly a market to be looked after to maintain the future of the UK sheep industry, meeting market demands is crucial. In Scotland, 100% of the halal slaughter trade is done prior to slaughter. Looking at the global market, the EU flock continues to contract rapidly, with QMS reporting an 8.2% reduction in the 10 years up to 2024 in their Q1 sheep market update. This is predicted to support UK exports to Europe in 2026, alongside a weaker exchange rate to support the sterling value, maintaining margins. Scotland's main EU export countries are France, Germany, Belgium, Italy and the Netherlands. In Oceania, the gap in prices has narrowed, with the EU driven by strong demand globally alongside supply pressure, with flock numbers falling in both Australia and New Zealand in 2025. Earlier in 2026, beef and lamb New Zealand reported a further 1.9% decline in the breeding flock in 2025. However, they did see a 1% increase in the national lamb flock following a positive scan in most regions, leaving their export forecast steady. In Australia, according to Meat and Livestock Australia, despite flock constrictions, the industry is forecasted to enter a period of recovery with an increase in ewe numbers of 4.3% in 2027. With that, carcass weight is also predicted to increase by around 1 kilo by 2027, showing an increase in efficiency in the Australian flock. However, the recovery of the Australian flock, alongside the free trade agreement, remains a long-term risk to our domestic price, especially during periods of increased local supply. Looking at the changes to shearing visas, it has been announced that changes to the visa rules, removing the seasonal concession that has previously allowed shearers to live and work in the UK for 3 months, are to end, following the extension for this season. The concession is set to end on the 30th of June this year. This change poses a major risk to seasonal staff availability, with around 75 shearers coming across to the UK each year from New Zealand and Australia. This also potentially risks animal welfare due to potential delays in shearing the national flock, leading to increased risk of fly strike, maggots and heat stress in the flock. Looking at the conflict in the Middle East from a sheep sector perspective. For the UK sheep industry, with much of our exports heading to the EU, the conflict is unlikely to affect the movements of sheep meat in the short term. However, the biggest impact is input costs, with both fuel and fertiliser seeing rapid increases in both cost and availability, putting pressure on margins and feed availability for the next winter. To plan to mitigate the impact of rising input costs, businesses should consider options to reduce reliance on bought-in fertiliser and feedstuffs where possible, by reviewing grassland management practices and considering alternative grazing options such as mixed species swards. And to end on a positive note, the results for the Scottish Farm Business Survey 2024-2025 were released on the 26th of March. They show an increase in average farm business income compared to 2023-2024. The average income for a less favoured area sheep unit rose by 151%, with less favoured area cattle and sheep units up by 54%, and lowland cattle and sheep incomes increasing by 22%, largely driven by an increase in livestock prices in 2025. There were variable results in terms of input costs, with all livestock farms showing a decrease in 2024-2025 in fertiliser and feed costs, but an increase in labour costs for LFA cattle and sheep units, while LFA sheep-only units saw labour costs fall by around 6%. Lowland cattle and sheep units were the only category of sheep farms to see input costs rise, predominantly driven by an increase in land and property costs. For more information on the survey results, please see the link in the show notes. Our final industry update looks at milk. Firstly, looking at milk production data. Although milk production continues to be greater than this time last year, with daily production currently at 36.67 million litres for the week ending the 21st of March 2026, 0.6% more than the previous week. The percentage increase has slowed through March, from 3.2% for the week ending the 7th of March, down to 2.2% for the week ending the 21st of March 2026. For the UK, February production was 1,218 million litres, 31 million litres higher than in February 2025. The latest data from AHDB estimates GB volume for February at 986 million litres. Turning to farm gate prices. The DEFRA farm gate milk price for February was 36.07 pence per litre, down 1.4 pence per litre from the January 2026 price and 21% less than 12 months ago. Processor milk prices appear to be holding steady, with Arla, Muller and Graham's announcing price holds, while First Milk have announced a 0.5 pence per litre price increase for April. Lactalis are paying 0.5 pence per litre more for their April milk, with the price differential being classed as a hardship bonus to help cover increased costs. The following Scottish milk prices are quoted in pence per litre. First Milk, April 30.75. Muller Direct, April 34.5. Graham's, April 34.5. Arla Farmers, April 34.07. Lactalis Fresh Milk Company, April 31.57. Organic milk prices are currently around 57 pence per litre, depending on the contract. Looking at dairy commodities and market indicators. The dairy market continues to recover despite ongoing disruption from global conflict. Average prices have risen across all commodities during this period. However, trends have varied. Skim milk powder is the standout performer, with prices rising by £300 per tonne over the course of the month to an average of £2,340, an increase of 15%. Conflict in the Middle East has driven prices higher as the fourth largest exporter, Iran, has been removed from the equation. Manufacturers are increasingly looking to use skim milk powder over more other expensive proteins. But dryer space will be a key limitation as we look towards the spring flush. The cheddar market is showing mixed signals, with the average price rising 5% to £380 per tonne. Stocks are reportedly tight after much curd was sold to drive cash flow. Mature and mild cheddar is said to be difficult to source at this point in time. The bulk cream market appears to be on a roller coaster. Prices have experienced a modest recovery, rising to a peak of £1.77 per kilo. However, sharply rising freight prices have led to many pulling back from the market, and prices have dropped to £1.50 per kilo. There is a huge volume of cream available globally, which is increasing the pressure on the market, and the price is averaging around £1,556 per tonne, which is still a 12% rise on the previous period. The average price for butter was £3,980 per tonne, which is an 8% increase on the previous period. The butter market has been incredibly volatile, with prices soaring to highs of £4,150 per tonne in the middle of the month. European demand increased as New Zealand product was diverted away from the Middle East, who then looked to European suppliers. European product continues to trade at a discount to Oceania, but flows in that direction have slowed as rising freight and logistical costs, along with ongoing challenges, prompting traders to step back from the market. Given the recovery in the price of cheddar and butter, the milk for cheese equivalent value has risen by 2.18 pence per litre, and the actual milk price equivalent value has seen a modest rise of 4.6 pence per litre off the back of increased demand for skim milk powder. The latest global dairy trade auction on the 17th of March 2026 resulted in the price index moving upwards by just 0.1% to a weighted average price across all products of $4,330 per tonne. Highlighting a survey for the milk sector. Over recent months, the milk sector has experienced significant pressure from global milk supplies and commodity markets, which has led to a sharp decline in milk prices. While the Fair Dealing Obligations Milk Regulations 2024 do not set milk prices, the regulations do require milk purchasers to apply price changes fairly, transparently, and in line with their contracts. The Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, ASCA is inviting those across the sector to share their views on the 2024 Fair Dealing Obligations Milk Regulations and to voice any potential concerns around non-compliance and unreasonable behaviour in a short survey. The survey asks about the regulations, the role of ASCA, and how relationships between producers and purchasers have worked during this challenging period. Please follow the link in the show notes to access the survey. And finally, for the milk sector, changing demands for dairy products. Graham's Family Dairy has completed a £3.5 million extension to its Glenfield site in Fife and now exports products to Hong Kong and the Middle East. The demand for cottage cheese has tripled due to social media trends, and many supermarkets are struggling to keep the product on the shelves. Once a staple in the 1970s and 1980s, cottage cheese has landed itself a new audience, with fitness enthusiasts, with more than 21 million tubs being sold across the UK last year. Retail experts predict that high-protein dairy products could be worth £400 million in the UK market within the next 5 years. And according to Guernsey Dairy, sales of full-fat milk have increased by 30% since 2019, from 560,000 litres in 2019 to just over 750,000 litres in 2025. By contrast, low-fat milk, which still accounts for the majority of our sales, has declined gradually, while skimmed milk has seen a more noticeable reduction, falling by around 23% since 2019. Tesco has also reported a large rise in sales of full-fat milk, up 3 million litres, a rise of more than 100% compared to 2 years ago. The changes are thought to be linked to some customers, especially younger customers, seeking more natural and minimally processed foods.
Hi, my name is Mark Robertson. I work as part of the digital dairy chain team as the Makerspace Coordinator. I am based in SRUC's Dairy Research and Innovation Centre in Dumfries, and I work with a really wide range of farmers, small to medium-sized enterprises, restaurants, with the main purpose of facilitating new product development. Firstly, let me introduce the concept of makerspaces. I do get asked about 5 times a day what it means, so I'll explain that now. They are places to develop new dairy-based food and drink products or move into a commercial scale production. We have 3 makerspaces that are located throughout the project region, one in Dumfries and Galloway, one in Cumbria and one in Ayrshire. With part of the focus of the future agricultural policy under the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Act 2024, being for the production of high quality food and to enable rural communities to thrive, the digital dairy chain offers any businesses or individuals involved throughout the whole dairy supply chain across Cumbria, South and West Scotland, a range of services to support innovation and productivity through collaboration. Originally, this was a 5-year UK research and innovation funded project with a budget of just over £21 million to transform the dairy sector in the region. However, due to the success of the project thus far, it has now been extended by a further year, meaning the project now ends in early 2028. With the project partners focused stimulating research and new product development, supporting business growth and attracting talent and skills across the region, the digital dairy chain have created 3 bespoke makerspaces, one in Cumbria, one in Ayrshire and Dumfries and Galloway. Each makerspace comprises of 2 types of facility, one being a new product development kitchen/lab and 2 a commercial and industrial scale facility. If you're looking to diversify and to add value to your dairy business or offer more products through your farm, shop or cafe, makerspaces can provide the facilities to develop new products. With this in mind, the 3 makerspaces do differ slightly in what they can offer, both in terms of product development and scale of development. The Ayrshire makerspace is essentially a new product development kitchen with small-scale cheese, butter, yoghurt and ice cream trials. The new product development lab facility at the new Dairy Research Innovation Centre, located at SRUC Barney campus, is also a development space for smaller scale cheese, butter, yoghurt and ice cream trials. It's the Cumbria makerspace, which is actually the larger factory-style makerspace, and this has been bolted on to Appleby Creamery, who is a project partner, and this is focusing on cheese production at that facility. We do understand that not everyone is able to leave their farm or business for the day. Therefore, we do have fully portable dairy processing equipment, which we can bring to your premises or farm and carry out the trials at your own time, at your own pace. The types of businesses that we can support, while initially the project was focusing solely on trialling new dairy products, most recently to support as many businesses as possible and in turn further support businesses in the dairy industry throughout the project region, the scope of the project has been broadened to include producers who use dairy as a main ingredient. This has allowed the project to support more farmers wishing to diversify or wishing to diversify further, as well as food and drink startups, food and drink entrepreneurs, chefs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and anything in between. Over the past year, the Makerspace work package has supported over 30 businesses and individuals with more than 12 hours of support each. Within that time, 8 new products have been launched to market, with another 9 very close to launching. If you have an idea of a potential new dairy-based product, or are looking for ideas how you can add value to your business, getting the help is simple. If you're based in Cumbria, Ayrshire, or Dumfries and Galloway, just get in touch. We can explain the range of product development that is possible throughout the project, how the process works, and what support is available through the Makerspace project and the wider Digital Dairy Chain team. Just simply, if you'd like to get in touch and would like to discuss this offering further, please do at mark.robertson@sruc.ac.uk.
Business and Policy News has links in the show notes to allow you to dig deeper into further articles of note. This month, we have 3 top picks. At number 1, it's an episode of FAS TV entitled After Winter, Crop Performance and the Season Ahead. With Julian Bell's arable article highlighting the pressure that farming is now under with rising fuel and fertiliser prices linked to the war in Iran, in this episode of FAS TV, Mark Bowser-Gibbs and Neil Havis review how crops have fared over the winter and explore current disease pressures and key agronomic challenges. In at number 2, we have a Rural Roundup podcast focusing on policy. Following on from my policy update, in this Rural Roundup podcast, we hear from Professor Stephen Thompson, who gives an update on the main policy changes for 2026, including the Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme, FAS, the upcoming second round of the Future Farm Investment Scheme, continuous professional development for farmers and crofters, together with an explanation of why are we having these policy changes. And finally, we highlight a recent published article, Agronomy for Ecological Focus Areas, EFA, Herb and Legume Rich Swards. With the new greening rules coming into play for 2026, this article explores the benefits of herb and legume rich pastures and looks at specific management requirements from selecting the right species through to establishing and managing the sward to help increase the diversity in rotational grass swards. You can view the original version of all these articles, listen to the podcasts, and watch the FAS TV episodes by using the links provided in the show notes. And if you have any questions, please email advice@fas.scot. From all the Business and Policy team, thank you very much for listening to this audio edition of Business and Policy News. Remember to like Business and Policy News to get notified of future episodes of this monthly podcast. Our next edition is due out on the 10th of May. A written version of this newsletter is available on the FAS website. To receive a copy each month, search for FAS newsletters and subscribe to Business and Policy. This newsletter was edited by me, Christine Beaton, and included articles written by Christine Beaton, Julian Bell, Sarah Balfour, Lorna Shaw, Ciara Sanahan and Mark Robertson. This podcast is produced in association with the Scottish Government and was presented by me, Christine Beaton, produced by Heather Stewart, edited by Cameron Waugh, with executive producers Kirsten Blackwood and Kerry Hammond. On a personal note, after 38 years, I'm retiring from SAC, and as this will be my last Business and Policy News podcast, I would like to introduce our new host, Brady Stephen, who many listeners will be familiar with as Brady often writes specialist articles for the publication. As Brady is with us today for my last broadcast, I would like to hand over to Brady to introduce himself.
Thanks very much, Christine, for the introduction, and congratulations on wrapping up an impressive track record with SAC. My name is Brady Stevens. I am a senior consultant in SAC's Food and Enterprise team. I'm excited to be taking over as host of the Business and Policy News podcast. I will have been with SAC for 5 years this summer, and writing and broadcasting for the publication has always been an enjoyable part of my role. Stay tuned.